The following paragraphs, which I am going to read now, are in continuation with the first part of the video. On the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned people of their own land. The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhumane societies the world has ever known. Now, in the last decade of the 20th century and my own 8th decade as a man, that system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedoms of all people, regardless of the color of their skin. Now, here is the explanation of this paragraph. On the day of the inaugural ceremony, the author was remembering the days of past when this whole system of apartheid emerged. It resulted in inequality and inferior treatment of dark-skinned people. They were deprived of their basic fundamental rights. As a result, one of the world's most brutal and inhumane society was born. This began even before he was born. This system created an atmosphere of extreme cruelty and injustice for a particular part of the community. Now, when he is in his 8th decade as a man, he, along with countless others, have changed this entire system that treats humans as humans irrespective of their color, caste, gender, or age. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people, people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. Explanation of this paragraph. This equal and free country was a result of sacrifices of countless other men and women who had fought all their lives for this day. The author wishes if he could thank them all, but unfortunately they didn't live to see the result of their courage. Nelson Mandela gathered his courage and power from all these people and thus wishes to make them proud. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound hurt. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that was that it produced the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sissolis, the Chief Lutherlis, the Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobuquets of our time. Men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity that their like may never be known again. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. Now, here the author says that this equal and free country has seen the oppression policy which scarred many people, and it will take a long time for them to move on. The author mentions that this hard time had its negative impacts, but it also exposed a lot of strong and courageous men who stood up and raised their voice. Thus, it required that level of unjust treatment to produce such great heroes. South Africa, he says, is rich in minerals and gems, but its greatest strength lies in its people. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk and give their lives for an idea. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength and resilience that defies the imagination. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Nelson Mandela in this paragraph says that he gained his strength to stand against the wrong from all the great nationalists he mentioned above, who have even risked their lives for freedom and tolerated ill treatment but never stopped fighting. He learned that courage didn't mean the absence of fear but the ability to overcome fear. The man who overcomes his fear is called brave. Next paragraph. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. Here, Nelson Mandela says that one is taught by its society to hate humans because of their skin, color, age, gender, and religion. No one is inborn with hatred. The author's idea is that if people can be taught hatred, they can also be taught love and brotherhood. In their most testing times in prison, when they were being treated brutally, Mandela would see a pinch of humanity and kindness in one of the guards, and that was enough to keep him going. He believes that goodness in human beings can be suppressed but never eliminated. Next paragraph. In life, every man has twin obligations: obligations to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children, and he has an obligation to his people, his community, his country. In a civil and humane society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities. But in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both of those obligations. In South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. In South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family and his home and was forced to live a life apart, a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. I did not in the beginning choose to place my people above my family, but in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son a brother, a father, and a husband. According to the author, every human being has its responsibility towards the family and as well as the society. Generally, under normal circumstances, a person can maintain the balance between the two, but in countries like South Africa, it was never so easy. When a person of color would come up for his society, he would be arrested and taken away from his family, thus keeping him from fulfilling both responsibilities. In the beginning, Mandela did not put his people over his family, but it was only later when he realized that in order to be there for his people, he was compromising his duties towards his own family. I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free. Free in every way that I could know. Free to run in the fields near my mother's hut. Free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village. Free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow moving bulls. As long as I obeyed my father and abided by the customs of my tribe, I was not troubled by the laws of man or God. It was only when I began to learn that my boyhood freedom was an illusion, when I discovered as a young man that my freedom had already been taken from me, that I began to hunger for it. At first, as a student, I wanted freedom only for myself, the transitory freedoms of being able to stay out at night, read what I pleased, and go where I chose. Later, as a young man in Johannesburg, I yearned for the basic and honorable freedoms of achieving my potential, of earning my keep, of marrying and having a family. The freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful life. Explanation of this paragraph. The author did not have the plan to stand against the apartheid system early in life. He lived his childhood like any normal child in South Africa. He only had to follow the rules set up by his father or the customs of his tribe. As soon as he grew up and began to learn the facts as to how people of color were treated, he decided to stand against it. He had this urge for freedom from inside, earlier just for himself, and later for having a basic life not just for himself but for everyone. In Johannesburg, they had to struggle for having a peaceful marriage, family, and basic amenities which everyone had access to where law and order existed. But then I slowly saw that not only was I not free, but my brothers and sisters were not free. I saw that it was not just my freedom that was curtailed, but the freedom of everyone who looked like I did. That is when I joined the African National Congress, and that is when the hunger for my own freedom became the greater hunger for the freedom of my people. It was this desire for the freedom of my people to live their lives with dignity and self respect that animated my life, that transformed a frightened young man into a bold one, that drove a law abiding attorney to become a criminal, that turned a family loving husband into a man without a home, that forced a life loving man to live like a monk. I am no more virtuous or self sacrificing than the next man, but I found that I could not even enjoy the poor and limited freedoms I was allowed when I knew my people were not free. Freedom is indivisible. The chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them. The chains on all of my people were the chains on me. Here, Nelson Mandela says that he joined the National African Congress when he realized it was not only him whose basic rights were snatched away, but of all those who looked like him. He had this fire inside him to free his people from the injustice. It was this fire that changed the author completely as a man, from being scared to brave, a lawyer to the one breaking the law, a family man to a man without a home, and a lively man into being a monk. It was the knowledge that he and his people had restricted freedom that made him into a selfless man as opposed to before. According to him, freedom cannot be divided. Snatching it away from someone was equivalent to taking it away from everyone, and that meant taking it away from the author. This is the last paragraph of the lesson. I knew that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. A man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow mindedness. I am not truly free as if I am taking away someone else's freedom, just as surely as I am not free when my freedom is taken from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. In this paragraph, Mandela mentions that the need to free the oppressor is as high as that of the oppressed, because the oppressor is bound by the shackles of hatred. He has the weight of all the people who he has tormented, for he carries the curses of all of their families. For taking away someone else's freedom and making them a prisoner, he becomes a prisoner of biasness. Thus, he is robbed of his humanity and needs to be freed. So, students, this brings us to the end of the lesson. I hope that you have understood it. I have